All right, welcome back to Gospel Fuel. We're going to dive in. We are on John chapter 6. We just wrapped up John chapter 5. Again, this is YouTube. Please like, subscribe, and share. Would love it if you were to do that. Thanks for joining us in Gospel Fuel. So, last time on John, we had Jesus was having a conversation with the religious leaders at the time. We talked about how their obsession was with receiving glory from man, not receiving glory from God. Therefore, they were missing who Jesus was. They're putting more stock in Moses, and they're putting more stock in the physical print Word of God than they were the Word of God Himself, Jesus. And now we jump into John chapter 6. So, John chapter 6, after this, Jesus went away to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, which was the Sea of Tiberias, and a large crowd was following him because they saw the signs that he was doing on the sick. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand, and lifting his eyes then, and seeing a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, "Where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat?" He said this to test him, for he himself knew what he was going to do. Well, Philip answered him, 200 denarii worth of bread would not be enough to give each of them just even a little. One of his disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said to him, "There's a boy here who has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what are they for so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." Now, there was much grass in the place, so the men sat down, about 5,000 in number. So Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. And when they had eaten their fill, he told his disciples, "Gather up the leftover fragments, so that nothing may be lost." So they gathered up and filled 12 baskets with fragments from the 5 barley loaves left by those who had not eaten. And when the people saw the sign that he had done, they said, "This is indeed the prophet who has come into the world." Perceiving then that they were about to come and take him by force to make him a king, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. That's John chapter 6, verse 1 through 15. This is that feeding of the 5,000 miracle. And so we find Jesus in a situation, he withdraws, he goes on the other side of the sea. He's had his conversation with the religious leaders, and he goes to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. But there is this large crowd that is following Jesus, because he was healing the sick. And so obviously, this is a big deal. Even if people didn't have sick that they were bringing to Jesus to be healed, people wanted to see these signs. There was a spectacle in this. Like, imagine being there and observing these miracles. That was something that you wanted to see. That was something that you wanted to be a part of. That was something that you wanted to observe and take in. Again, there's no social media, there's no TV, there's no things that are going on. This is drama at its finest. This is reality TV at its finest. And this is Jesus performing miracles. And so this crowd, this large crowd, we know that has about 5,000 men that were following him. And then Jesus looks on the crowd and he's like, "Hey, these guys are hungry. Philip, what can we do about that?" Philip's saying, "No, Jesus, we got 200 denarii. There's no way. That might be enough to give them each a little morsel. That's it. Nothing that's going to fill. Nothing that's going to constitute a meal. Nothing that's going to satisfy. There's not going to be a portion of this bread or this food that's going to be enough to fill these people." And the Passover of the Passover, the feast of the Jews, the feast, there was nothing that was going to constitute a feast. But it's interesting. I find it interesting here. Jesus asks, he tests him because he knows what he's about to do. He knows about the 5 loaves and 2 fish. He knows what's going on. But yet, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said, "Well, there's a boy here." They know what Jesus is capable of. They know about the water to wine. They know that Jesus has control over physical matter. They've experienced that with the water to wine. That was kind of the most tangible And they know that Jesus had control over sickness and disease. They've seen that take place. So they've never seen anything like this yet. So they're like, okay, well, Andrew's saying, hey, Jesus, guess what we got? We got 5 loaves, we got 2 fish. There's 5,000 people. 5, 2, 5. This is what's going on. 5 loaves, 2 fish, 5,000 people. 5,000 hungry mouths. And so Jesus says, okay, tell everyone to sit down. Nice grassy area. They all sit down. And Jesus has the people sit down. And it says, Jesus then took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, whatever that looked like, obviously he prayed or he was just giving thanks, and publicly, whether everybody heard it or not, 5,000 people there, Jesus probably could project pretty good. Public speaking was a huge part of his ministry, talking to large crowds. And it said, then Jesus took the loaves, when he had given thanks, he distributed them to those who were seated. So also the fish, as much as they wanted. So we have 5 loaves, 2 fish, 5,000 people. I don't know about you. I've been a part of things where you're feeding a certain amount of people. Maybe you have some guests over. You lay some things out. I've hosted barbecues at my house, and you got to, hey, I need to buy 30 hamburgers and 15 hot dogs and buns and everything. Like 5 loaves and 2 fish is not going to go very far with 5,000 people. Can't imagine feeding 5,000 people. That is a huge event. There was like 150 at my wedding, and that was a lot of people to feed. Imagine 5,000. So Jesus takes 5 loaves, 2 fish, feeds 5,000 people. Obviously, this is a miracle taking place. Jesus is multiplying. The stuff that they're handing out just keeps coming. It never ends. Widow's oil situation times a lot. And so Jesus is communicating his lordship and his power over physical matter. He's also communicating to everyone there that he cares enough to meet their practical needs. They're hungry. Jesus wants to give them something to eat. We know Jesus isn't this boastful showman who wants to make himself look great, but he's this loving Savior who wants to meet the needs of the people he loves. And this is what happens with this feeding of the 5,000. Jesus could have sent them away. Hey guys, we're going to have a little supper break. Why don't you go eat something, come back. Some would have stayed because they want to see the sick be healed. They want to see the miracles take place. They don't want to miss that. They don't want to hear about it later. They want to see it for their own eyes. And then not only that, if you remember the miracle of the widow's oil in the Old Testament, as soon as that last vessel was filled, remember they said, gather all the vessels that you could. As soon as that last vessel was filled, the oil dried up. Boom, it was done. But with this miracle, Jesus says, hey, why don't we go collect any leftovers? We don't want there to be any waste. We can send people home with little doggy bags potentially. Let's go collect up the extra food. The extra food from 5 loaves, 2 fish, 5,000 people. And so they do. What do they have? They have 12 baskets. I've heard people make significance of the 12 tribes of Israel, whatever. I don't know if there's significance there. That's could be a bit of a reach. Could be some significance. I'll leave that up to you. But needless to say, there's a ton. There's 12 baskets. I don't know how big these baskets were, but it was more than 5 loaves, 2 fish, and 5,000 people had just eaten as much as they wanted. 2 fish, 5,000 people as much as they wanted. I do some fishing here and there. 2 fish is not enough. So this is an amazing miracle. So they gather up these 12. They gather up these extra leftover pieces, 5 barley loaves left by those who were eating. And when people saw the sign that he had done, they said, this is indeed the prophet capital P, who is to come into the world. So prophet, not quite Messiah, not quite Son of God, but we know this. We know that God is with this guy and God is doing miracles through this man. Again, reminiscent to things of old, reminiscent to miracles of old. And they were there to literally taste and see that Jesus is good, that Jesus is sent from God. See, Jesus is not afraid of engaging our 5 senses. As a matter of fact, he encouraged that the people were hungry. He could have said, hey guys, we're going to have an extended time of fasting and prayer. No, he wants to feed them. He wants to meet that need that they have. He wants them to taste and see that he is good. And then they're so excited. If you ever want to get somebody to absolutely love you, then, feed them a good meal. And they feed him a good meal, and perceiving that they were about to come and take him by force to make him a king, small k, Jesus withdrew again to the mountain by himself. So Jesus, comes to this time where he wants to retreat for time by himself after he just fed the 5,000. They came out to see maybe he's going to heal some sick. Instead, everyone, it's the Oprah. You get some fish and bread. You get some fish and bread. Everybody gets some fish and bread. They get to experience a miracle that's amazing and unlike anything Jesus had done up until this point. It's miraculous. Jesus showing that he cares about people. He didn't just come and say, hey, listen to my words, and start preaching from the mountainside. Although that would have been great because it's Jesus and we want to hear his wisdom. We want to hear his words. Instead, he saw their need. They didn't ask. It does not say. They came up to Jesus and they asked him for some food. No. He saw that they were hungry. He knew of the need that there was coming. And there was this individual, this young boy, 5 loaves, 2 fish, 5,000 people. Man, Jesus cares. Jesus, comes and meets the need, sees the need, responds to the need of the people. Let's carry on. We got some time. We start in verse 16 of John chapter 6. It says, and when evening came, his disciples went down to the sea. They got into a boat and they started to cross the sea to Capernaum. So they get in this boat. They're like, hey, Jesus has gone out to be by himself. No one is with him. We're going to get in a boat. We're going to go across to the Sea of Capernaum. So it was now dark, and Jesus had not yet come to them. They're like, we've waited a while. We should probably move over while, we don't want to be out here in the dark of night. It was already dark, but yeah, they're going to venture out. But the sea was rough. The sea became rough because of a strong wind that was blowing. And when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles, they saw Jesus walking on the sea and coming near the boat. And they were frightened. They saw Jesus, but they weren't really sure it was Jesus. They see a figure walking across the water through these rough waters to them. But he said to them, it is I, do not be afraid. Then they were glad to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat was at land in which they were going. So if you know the distance between, there's kind of there's a miracle that takes place of Jesus walking on water. He is, defying, and it wasn't frozen. He wasn't on a frozen pond. This was wet, deep water that you would sink into. You can't walk on. He didn't have, floaty boots, like some kind of weird invention. Jesus was defying the physical laws, breaking the physical laws of this world, and coming to his disciples on the boat. Just made practical sense, this one. Otherwise, he'd have to walk all the way around or find another boat to catch up with them. He's like, I'll just walk across the water. And again, this is a miracle that is exclusively reserved for the eyes of his disciples. But yet when they see him, they're afraid. But again, he says, it is I, do not be afraid. And they recognize the voice of Jesus. I love that about this story. As soon as he says, it is I, do not be afraid. He didn't say, it is I, Jesus, do not be afraid. He says, it is I, do not be afraid. That his sheep know his voice. His disciples knew his voice, and they were glad to take him into the boat. And as soon as they take him into the boat, it says, immediately the boat was at land to which they were going. Boom, there they were. Jesus walks on water, and we have this kind of boat that's either going really quickly, suddenly, or is it teleported? We don't know, but it's really cool. But again, it's another kind of subtle miracle that shows up in John chapter 6 here. And we're going to dive into John 6:22 next time. And Jesus talks about how he is the bread of life. Jesus is the bread of life. And we know that bread has significance for us in, communion. We got the bread, we got the cup. The cup represents Jesus' blood. The bread represents his body. And we look back at the first miracle in John 6 is feeding the 5,000, bread and fish. Jesus is that bread. Jesus is the bread of life that satisfies and fills and completes us. And it never runs out. Jesus is always enough. And if we look at the miracle in John 6 of feeding the 5,000, remember 5 loaves, 2 fish, 5,000 people, Jesus not only is enough, Jesus is more than enough. He gathers up 12 baskets full of fragments of bread. There was leftovers from 5 loaves, 2 fish, 5,000 people. Why? Because Jesus is the bread of life that satisfies, fills, and completes us in our place of need. You know, in this life, human beings are hungry. Human beings are thirsty. We're thirsty for love and acceptance. And we're thirsty for redemption and salvation. We might not know it, but we are. And Jesus is the answer to that. That is the good news of the gospel. That is the beauty of the gospel. That Jesus, he sees your need for fulfilling and completing. He sees your need and mine, and he responds. He responds not just to give us a small morsel, a small taste of his goodness, but instead, Jesus he's not just enough to fill us to full. These people had as much as they wanted. As much as they wanted. I love that line. It wasn't just as much as they wanted, but there was 12 baskets of leftover. For you and for me, Jesus, the gospel of Jesus is more than enough. More than enough to fulfill and complete us. And that's the good news of the gospel. That's the beauty of the gospel. Thank you so much for listening.